Welcome viewers to our program Let's Talk. Today I have the honor and privilege of having in studio Dr. Visham Bhimull. He's a man who wears many hats. Dr. Ji, welcome to the program.
आपको बहुत धन्यवाद निमंत्रण देने के लिए यहाँ होना.
धन्यवाद. He is also well versed in various languages and we are discussing those issues as we go along. So first of all, I'll ask Dr. Visham Bhimull, to do a bit of introduction about himself, what he has been doing, what he has done, what his qualifications are. He's a medical doctor, by the way.
So yeah, a medical doctor, graduated in 2005, then did postgrad in family medicine and now doing a master's in public health. Because, that's the career path that I see myself going into. But apart from that, when I was at university, I remember I did Hindi. When I did my family medicine postgrad, I did French. And now my master's in public health, I'm doing Dutch. But
it's a lot of exposure to languages.
Yes, and it's all related to me searching for my identity. Because I remember when I grew up with my grandparents, yes, Trinidad English Creole was spoken at home, but it was a traditional Indian Hindu family where the Hindustani was also something that I was exposed to on a daily basis. I could have managed any language to some extent, but because after going to school, started just being educated in English, it was a path that I always aspired towards. And also for the fact that there was always this question in my mind about the Hindi you would encounter in films, the Hindi you would encounter that people from India who came to Trinidad after the colonial times would have spoken, and the Hindi I grew up with, or Hindustani as my grandparents used to call it.
As you speak here, my mind goes to the point that you have been exposed to many languages and you say you're looking for your identity. Do you think the language will bring identity to us? And what language are we speaking about here? Is it Bhojpuri? Is it Hindi? Is it a dialect of Hindi?
And that's the points of contention that I would bring up. But most of what I had to be based on the research I've done. If I were to speak to you in French now, you would...
I would understand a word.
You would understand a word. But the fact that somebody is expressing a different language, you actually see them as a different identity.
Right, okay.
So languages are very important point of identity because a lot of what we express come from emotions and who we are and our perspectives and how we were brought up. So a lot of times people neglect the fact that language is actually one of the most integral parts of who we are.
Very good.
Is a tool in which we express ourselves and our ideas.
So you are saying basically we need, if you want to identify as Indians, whether Trinidadian Indians or Indian Indians, you must have that aspect of an Indian language, whether it's Hindi, Kannada, Telugu, whatever.
And it's very important too because when I travel all over the world, sometimes I may not speak in English, I might speak in Hindi or French. A lot of people kind of have it difficult to grapple with what my identity is.
Right.
Because one, in an outward perspective, phenotypically, I look like I'm from India.
Yeah.
Right? When I put posts on Facebook, because I have two important pages. One is the Caribbean Hindustani page, which deals with a lot of what we're discussing here, as well as a Hindi conversation page where we promote the conversational aspects of Hindi. A lot of people ask if I'm from Suriname because I'm heavy posted in Dutch at times. So in myself, when I started exploring all those aspects, I realized that indeed languages are a very, very important point of identity.
So let's say from a historical context, our ancestors came, and you made a very important point before the program started, was pre-colonial days. So when they came here, there wasn't partition yet. What impact does that have on our language and how we speak on our ancestors?
And that's a very important point you brought up because my grandparents never referred to the language they spoke, or their first language, as Hindi per se. They would always say Hindustani or Indian. I also do interviews with a lot of people in their winter years, over 85, who are descendants of indentured laborers. And when you ask them you would ask them, okay, so what language your grandparents, who would have either come on the ship or parents, what would they have spoken? And they often, most of the times the response is Hindustani or Indian, not Hindi or not Bhojpuri. Because I remember when I spoke to my grandfather and asked him once, well, what is this Bhojpuri? He himself couldn't understand. So the concept of Indian language classification after independence was completely different to when they had left India. Most of the indentured laborers came from Western Bihar and Eastern Uttar Pradesh. And as the heartland of what is designated today as the Bhojpuri speaking area of India. You also have to understand India in the context of geographically or a linguistic geographical perspective to understand what language they would have spoken. I remember growing up, my grandparents themselves even referring to the language they speak as a broken or corrupted form of standard Hindi. But after doing much research, I don't know if you know about Dr. Peggy Mohan.
Not really, no.
Dr. Peggy Mohan, a Trinidadian who had done the only documented research on the Hindustani variety in Trinidad. Her thesis or PhD thesis was Trinidad Bhojpuri, a morphological study, where she documented the morphology of it to prove that that language spoken by the indentured laborers and later on by maybe our grandparents or great-grandparents was actually a completely different language than what is standard Hindi or what is understood today internationally as standard Hindi.
You have made an important point that language brings our identity. But language also speaks about political sovereignty. So when you find that the English brought on our Indian ancestors here, our ancestors, they tried to take every language and give them English. And that happened and offspring to our generation. What is the impact of that? And how do you see that as happening? The political directorate wants you to use their language.
I mean, to just bring it in perspective, I always look at parallels. So if we look at India itself, the time the British were in India, which would have been Calcutta, they started their first capital. And at that time, the Mughals would have still controlled most parts of northern India. The language or the aristocratic language was Persian, right? The British themselves, even in their colony, were still using Persian as administration language or the language to administrate, even though their language was English. And after some time, then Hindustani or Hindi, which we know as today, became the language of administration. So it took some time to change. Even in Trinidad and Tobago, English was not really part of the lingua franca of the masses until the 1950s and after that. It had to do with the British education system. Now, my grandparents would have spoken Hindustani, Trinidad English Creole, which were two languages. Before them, Indians could have spoken Patois, which is a variety of French Creole. They could have spoken Hindustani and English. And in some cases, 4 languages could have been spoken. But if you didn't speak standard English, in other words, if you didn't go through the education system, speaking more than one language at that point in time would have seen as something backward or something that would have been as peasant or the hoi polloi and not of the aristocratic or educated class.
It's my understanding that you are Vice President of Hindi Nidhi.
Yes.
So what kind of trust are you making towards establishing the language or the facets of a language in Trinidad and Tobago?
Now, I remember growing up, because a lot of what I do would be obviously based on when I was brought up and what I saw going on around me. I learned Spanish at school, up to CXC, and then after that never used it. But yet still found myself being a person of East Indian origin, being encountered with the Hindi, Hindustani language on a daily basis. Till at some point in my adulthood I realized, but apart from English, the only other language being of East Indian origin that I interact with on a daily basis is Hindi. So it should come from the East Indian community to know that point, or at least to appreciate that point. To go further and say, okay, so if you're teaching Spanish and French at school, and we see colonial relevance for that, then we should also look at our history and look at Hindi because it is relevant to a major part of the population. The Ministry of Education has started and they created a syllabus to teach Spanish now at primary schools. The Hindi Nidhi took note of that, and what we started doing is based on that now developing a syllabus so that they could teach Hindi at a primary school level as well. We're still in that process. Hopefully by the end of the year we want to at least develop such a syllabus so we could now present it to the ministry before September. So now we could see Hindi being introduced at least at a primary school level and then work further from there.
You know, Spanish, you said there's a syllabus for it in primary schools. They are pushing Spanish and there's no problem with that. But the thing about it, for someone who learns Spanish, they have no problem. But how we cross that threshold where people think that language, Hindi, is for them Indians only? or we have not crossed that threshold yet? Do you think we have crossed that and we can go about in a primary school, secondary school, teaching Hindi as a language and don't have that kind of bias against it?
Now, what you have to understand is our education system is still a colonial education system. And the subliminal messages you get from it is still that element of superiority, inferiority within the context of colonialism. I mean, that's the major reason why Spanish and French are recognized as languages we should learn, because it was languages of the colonial masters.
And so to English of the
right. So,
Europeans.
I mean, the East Indian community themselves not to blame, but when you also look at culture, our understanding of culture comes from that education system. So that whether it be French Creole culture, whether it be East Indian culture, whether it be Syrian culture, whatever aspect of it still kind of maintain that inferiority associated with it. Now, let's look at just not Hindustani that my grandparents would have spoken, but let's look at Patwa. Patwa, which is a lot of people, just like I would have understood it as a child, to be a Bhojpuri or Hindustani, my grandparents spoke as a broken form of standard Hindi, which is not. Patwa indeed was also seen as a broken form of French, but Patwa is not a broken form of French, it's actually a language within its own right. So much so that St. Lucia and all the French-speaking Caribbean invested in producing books to teach the children that variety of Antillean Creole, which is French Creole. So it's very important to kind of cross that barrier. But you see, and this is where identity comes in, and this is where Indian arrival comes in, is that we truly have to appreciate our identity within the context of the national fabric. And we also have to preach that message so that even to lobby for the education system to change, where we see not only ourselves, but every manner of person that forms Trinidad and Tobago or the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago as citizens are valid within their own way of expression and identity. Only when we cross that barrier then we can reach that point. Because, I mean, looking at it from a Hindi perspective, yes, and a lot of times I remember when I was a child, my parents didn't really see the need for me to pursue Hindi as a language. Because at the end of the day, parents would want their children to pursue something that will give them a job later
Employment,
on, and also give them a promising future. Language, whether it be French, whether it be Spanish, whether it be Hindi, doesn't give that, because a lot of times, and I think we had this in a conversation earlier, if you really look at the East Indian community specifically, we had jumped from farmers to teachers to bankers, now to doctors and lawyers and well, politicians. But looking at that over 4 generations is too big a jump up the social ladder to have our mentality still back in the days of colonialism. So that
is an important point you're making, because in this day and age of 2018, how do we go about celebrating Indian Arrival Day if you want to go back to those things that you were quite so long ago?
Exactly. And a lot of times I find now there are a lot of conversations with respect to Indian Arrival, a lot of conferences take place. But what comes out of it, we really need to really map where we are now and then decide as a group where we want to be, because we have arrived, yes. We have established ourselves economically, politically, whatever you want to call it. Now we have to chart a course from that point into the next 10 years.
Hold that thought. We have you in the program Let's Talk with Dr. Visham Bhimull. We are speaking about language. He made a very important point in this year of 2018 of Indian Arrival Day. He said that language gives identity. We'll return again with a discussion in a short while.
It's time to get interactive. Introducing ITV's People Report, the place where you tell us your concerns. Highlight your issues within your community and let us help you. Call our newsroom at 222-0108 or 222-6177 or email us at itvnews1@gmail.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook, ITV News Trinidad and Tobago. We'll hear your concerns and let your voice be heard. ITV's People Report, where your opinion matters.
Welcome back, viewers. We are discussing today the important topic of Indian Arrival. In studio with me, Dr. Visham Bhimull, a man who wears many hats, academic, research, and many other areas he's involved in. We're discussing the Indian impact in terms of Indian Arrival and language. We'll continue discussions. Dr. G.
one point we were making, and I mean where we have to move forward. Now, a lot of times we look at the crime. This is a public health perspective, from a medical public health perspective. A lot of times we look at crime, we look at the degradation of society and values and what comes up in the newspapers. But we want to promote culture. Say we call it carnival, say we call it chutney soca. What I don't think if anybody had done any research on such things, but the content of the song reflects the behavior of the society, which is
Definitely.
right, glorifying alcohol, glorifying sex, glorifying violence, and it's not just soca calypso, but it's also chutney.
The chutney themes are realistic,
Exactly.
in my opinion.
And from my perspective, because I did work with some artists before and I brought the points up, I actually composed lyrics in the language of our forefathers and the language my grandparents used to speak for artists to sing. More of a poetic style now. And next, or one thing I think that us as the East Indian community we do not appreciate is that a lot of these songs we have, or at least religious or poetic styles from Kabir Das or from Tulsi Das, Mirabai, or from Surdas, these have come from a pivotal point in India where there was a revolution against the Mughals invasion and bringing Islam into India, where the Hindu writers started writing poetry based on their Hindu perspective. So the famous line, Kahat Kabir Suno Bhai Sadhu, that is Awadhi, and that is from Awadhapur, where Ram was from. Yeah. And even in the chutney songs, you might probably hear it. A lot of times I find, especially, and I think the artists are to blame, is that they would probably take lyrics not knowing what it means, once it has a catchy melody, and bring it up. But if you actually listen to the content of some of them, they actually contribute, at least at a subconscious level, to the mentality of the population. But if we now would utilize the language as a tool to change that, I think is a very important point.
But right now, do you think the chutney songs represent the identity of the Indian?
At the end of the day, even though I mentioned the topic of alcohol, of sex, and of violence, those three have existed in civilization from time immemorial. Wherever you have human beings, they do exist. But what I find is the negative aspect is that that is the only aspect of society we focus on to highlight.
The way they sing about it.
Exactly.
Who take who wife and who whining down low.
They
and
glorify
it.
it.
Yeah.
They glorify it.
As a matter of fact, the calypsos even go about in a better theme than the chutney singers.
Yes, that's true. Now, calypso started off being in Patwa, right? And it really contained the expression of revolt, revolution that the African slaves would have had at that point. If you really look at the context, at least, so we're looking at the development of chutney music, which would have started from the time of Sundar Popo, right?
His lyrics was good.
Yeah, it was. But at the end
Most of them are.
at the end of the day, a lot of people who did research in it, chutney was really the answer for the Indian or East Indian form of expression to be accepted in the mainstream. Because prior to that, it was not heard on the national stage.
No.
The national stage at this point in time, or at least for the decades past, would have been the carnival stage.
But even the acceptance was not there because from chutney, they had to move to chutney soca. So chutney itself was still not recognized. They had to attach it to something else.
Yeah, they had that.
They had to tag on somewhere.
Exactly. So, I mean, it was always a struggle in the East Indian community to let their form of expression be on the national stage. But at the end of the day, I think we need to stop, look back, and realize, but we come from a very highly world-renowned literary tradition in India, right? Starting from the Mahabharata itself, which is in classical Sanskrit, which these books, the Ramcharitamanas, the Ramayana, two separate books, by the way. The Ramayana is in classical Sanskrit, written by, or at least composed by Valmiki, whereas Ramcharitamanas is in Awadhi. Again, language shift to show how society changes. But they are used as great works, especially at a tertiary level. And the poems of who I referred to before, if you really look at it, it speaks of point of renaissance in understanding the identity of what is Indian at that time when the Mughals had invaded India. And Islam and Hinduism started to mesh to form what was now the Indian identity. And if you really deconstruct these songs and see the experience, it actually comes from a deep place within, looking philosophically as the devotee, as the lover, and God as the beloved, when you go into Sufism. And it's a recurring theme when you talk about it like that. So the same point you want to express about love, this guy loving this girl. I mean, there is a tactful way to do it, but also send a message and not go down to
low level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
the theme maintains a certain dignity. Love and a certain, yeah.
I think, and we all know, not the grammar of language now, but understanding a language and utilizing a language to create that renaissance, or to create that change. And I think the onus now is upon the artists to try to change.
How will these artists get this hint, this big hint, that you need to sing on topics that really make more sense than just, things that are degrading? And, for instance, recently we had a calypso about politicians, about the prime minister and so on, and it was a cry against it. Now, maybe the way you put it across, or how to put it across. So how do we get these chutney singers? Well, now you call them soca chutney, or chutney soca. How do you get them to get that idea in their mind?
I mean, I remember,
deal with themes that have impact on society positively.
I remember that because the artist had sung, and then people were showing examples. But at the end of the day, if someone does something wrong,
it doesn't mean you have to do it.
It doesn't make sense. You have to do it too.
Right.
I mean, you could actually now show you are the bigger person.
Correct. Right above that.
And language is a very important thing. We see it in Parliament a lot of times, and we could actually see how versed people are, how dexterous they are in getting themselves across. You could basically use low degrading words in Parliament and bring yourself down, or even in speaking to the public, or you could actually be tactful and use words in such a way to get that same point across, but still come across being the bigger person.
Yeah.
And I think Trinidad and Tobago is not at a level at understanding that from the bottom right up to the top.
Now, I want to ask you, as you speak about it, there's something which I like to get your opinion on. When our ancestors came, right, in colleges, when I went to college, it was taught us, and I didn't agree with it, that our ancestors spoke Hindi, basically, Awadhi, Bhojpuri, whatever, and then they started talking English. And then they came up and said, rightfully you said, Trinidadian English is not broken English, it's a different language. So if they mean OAD, that is something different. That is not broken English. So what was told us that the way we speak is not between the clash between the Indians and the Trinidadians, rather it's a new language. And many people are against that kind of opinion. I actually believe, for instance, if we speak Gona, where does Na come from?
Yeah, that's
Hindi.
actually a
So what's the Hindi impact upon our Trinidadian language?
So that's a very important point you brought across. Just like I said, Patois is not broken French. Our Trinidad English Creole is not broken English. Actually, our Trinidad Creole English uses a Patois grammar system with an English vocabulary onto it, right? So whereas we would say, I went, past tense, we add a past tense marker, which is did, and use the raw verb. So I did go, past tense, I went. I go, present tense, does, present tense marker with the raw verb. I does go. And then future tense marker is go. So I go. That construction I just used there to show you that.
But even take it from the Trinidad language, you said I went. In Trinidadian language with the Hindi influence, I did go.
Right.
We say I did go, I did go.
Right.
I did go.
Right.
D, the marker.
And another one is in Hindustani we say, to say you are able to do something, you use the verb jana, to know. So you say na jane dhoe, na jane pakawe. I do not know how to cook. But if you translate it idiomatically, it's I cannot cook. That actually came from Hindustani because that's how you would express it.
Yeah, another example which you will agree to, I suppose, is we have this phrase come go. What is come and go? That's direct from Hindi, jana.
Yeah.
A jana, a jaiye.
If it comes from Bhojpuri, is ave jai. Ave jai
But
means
Hindi is
come and
a
go.
jana.
Right, same thing.
Yeah, but so the Trinidad, they are transfer into the Trinidadian language as come go. Nowhere in the world is a come go.
Right.
Come is one thing and go is the next thing.
And then to the Hindustani languages and other Indian languages, they do the repetition. So you ask tum kahan gay. Or kaha kaha gay. Where and where did you go? But in English, you don't say where and where.
No.
But in Trinidad English, coming from that Hindustani semantic and grammar construction, I remember growing up, my grandparents saying, so where and where you went? Meaning you had to itemize.
They actually, yeah. And another good example is that, for instance, in Hindi, you duplicate the adjective. Like you say, waha bade bade aadmi. He's a big man.
Yeah.
That's the English, but it comes from Hindi. So what I'm saying, the point I'm making is, the structures in Trinidad language came from Hindi, but nobody wants to accept that.
Right. And
I would say all of them, most of it.
Another point is, well, you know about to in Hindi. To is the emphatic to. It's ta in Bhojpuri. So I remember my grandmother used to say, I'll bring it here, ta. So that ta actually came into
from
the speech of Hindustan, or at least the East Indians in Trinidad, based on what they would have heard. It might sound funny to some people, but I remember my Aja's sister, we call her Pua. I remember once we were talking about crime. Now, she didn't go, probably just went to primary school and that was it. So that the language she would have spoken on a day-to-day basis was Trinidad English Creole. So I remember we were talking about the crime, and I remember she said, boy, yeah, easy na, them thief and them shooting the car K-wheel and thing. When you deconstruct that sentence, you realize it's just elements of Hindustani.
Hindi structure.
E is yaha from Hindi. E and u. E is he, she, it. U is he, she, it. Proximate versus distal. So she used that E, and then she used the possessive particle, which was the K, car, K, wheel. And I remember growing up with my grandparents speaking like that. So in truth and in fact, when you look at that generation of the East Indian community, you realize that they actually speak in that point of where you have a meshing now of the English and the Hindustani.
But do you, in your experience, actually see in the academic field in Trinidad and Tobago, where there is university, primary, secondary schools, where they actually expose you and tell you that the grammar in Trinidadian language comes from Hindi?
No, and that goes back to the point we were making about the education system. Because we still maintain that educational system of a British education system where, okay, if you don't say it in the Queen's English, then you're not educated, or it doesn't sound educated. So I think that is what is maintained. Now, I remember once, because I have a lot of links from Suriname as well as Holland, my friends from Holland had come to Trinidad, and we sat down with this Trinidadian guy. He's mixed, and he lives in Florida. From a child, he went to the States. So we just started up a conversation about, my parents used to tell me not to speak like that. And he started to talk about how Trinidadian people speak and how they bring down themselves. So me and my friend, because one of the guys I liaise with is Motilal Marhe. I mentioned Peggy Mohan. Motilal Marhe did the Suriname research in Suriname and the Hindustani, and his son. And we were there with him. And we were trying to explain to him, no, but you have to understand, you have to be proud of that as well. So again, it comes back to the point of identity.
Today we're in discussion with Dr. Visham Bhimull, a man versed in linguistics, and we have discussed, first of all, language gives your direction in terms of who you are and your culture. And we ended up discussion today with the fact that in this month of Indian Arrival Day we are celebrating, the way we speak the Trinidadian language, you rightly mentioned, is that Trinidadian language is not broken English. The Trinidadian language has been influenced highly by the Indian languages, Bhojpuri and Hindi. And we hope that this continues. I hope this can be put in a book sometime and expose all of us to that kind of information. So once again, Doctor, thanks a lot. Until next time, viewers, see you around.